I'm waiting for everything to get connected. We're almost there.
It's good to see your face again. Hi, Sass.
Good to see you too. Glad to have you on, Kai. You know what? Let's give myself a little bit more light. All right, all right. Welcome. Yeah, just a thing at the beginning. I don't have like a huge viewership yet, but this is gonna end up on YouTube as a video that people will always be able to watch, just so you're aware. But so yeah, it's there are no viewers yet. Obviously, we just started, but I'm super glad to have you. So I guess we'll just start with a little bit of chit chat. Just
Sure.
Kai, tell me about your day a little bit. What you've been up to? You sounded like you were pretty busy today.
Yeah, well, so we are leaving, or I am leaving a 10-year period of pretty intense domestic violence. And so today was our first day, me and the kids, with counselors that are trained specifically to work with victims. And so it's free service here in Indianapolis. Indiana has very progressive, actually, child and mother laws and about domestic violence and helping protect victims. And as a result, they actually have pretty broad and diverse array of services for women and children and other victims, particularly LGBTQIA victims as well, victims of harassment who need shelter and support. There's a lot of programs here in Indiana, surprisingly, to help support these more marginalized aspects of our community. So I'm very glad to be here because my 10 years in Missouri got me a lot of traditional counseling and support, but not specifically victim services, and certainly nothing for my kids. And my kids have witnessed domestic violence between me and their dad, and they've also been victims of violence from their dad. So it's a complex set of problems, and without really stable services in the community, it leaves victims short in terms of the support that they need to either deal with the abuse or get out of the abuse. So I had lived in battered women's shelters in the course of my marriage. I'd stayed with friends. We were separated more than we lived together when we were married because of the abuse. And the authorities in Missouri almost always are kind of slanted on the side rather than being victims advocates. They kind of like to blame the victim and hold victims accountable for the abuse that they endure, and more or less kind of take that side of the coin of, well, what's wrong with you that you're living with an abuser? And as a result, it's been a very hard situation for me to help protect my children. And ultimately, the world kind of all merged together into a perfect opportunity for me to just pick up and go when I've spent the last 7 years solidly unable to do that because I needed to have the agreement of the kid's dad, in order for us to travel out of state or go places, just per our parenting arrangement, which ultimately, if you kind of look at the way the family court system is run, and in particular in Missouri, there's a lot of grift happening. There's a lot of corruption in the court system. There was recently an expose on the family courts in St. Louis, Missouri, in St. Louis County, where 31 different judges had to recuse themselves from one particular case because they had all been implicated in this corruption scandal where they were milking money from families, literally and openly, like discussed it on a Zoom call. It got recorded. Like, there's no question that these judges, these prosecutors, and these guardians ad litems, which are appointed on, like a parent can request, or the court itself can just appoint a guardian ad litem, which is supposed to be an attorney, to promote the best interest of the children. And what those GALs basically were saying was, my clients don't have any money, so we're just going to bleed this mom dry, mostly mothers, because mothers are generally the ones without any wealth, without any regular income. Like, that's just been historically true. And up until about the 1970s, custody battles, like in a divorce, almost always resulted in children going with their father because of the financial support that he was able to provide and the financial stability. And when moms were awarded custody, often it was because she had some sort of her own independent income, not usually from work, but often from inheritance, or because she lived with family that could then provide that stable economic support. And even then, in those cases, oftentimes the courts would find in the favor of the father. So it's only been within my lifetime that these ideas of, co-joint parenting, 50-50 custody, um, um, have really become prevalent. And the problem with all of that is when there's an underlying abuse issue, if that's not codified in the family law codes, right? If there's not exceptions granted to this, if there isn't a statutory exception for domestic violence in a family law situation, it is then very difficult for victims to gain the safety they need from their abusers, because the courts are like, no, this is property and you're going to split it evenly. And one of the cases that they were talking, that was in this article about St. Louis County and family court system, that the courts had repeatedly returned a child to her father, who was also a sexual predator, had been on was is on the registry for sexually molesting that particular child. So they were returning a young woman to the adult male caregiver, her father, who was also consistently molesting her. And the courts ignored that because he had money. And that's one of the reasons why I'm where I am right now. I was fortunate that after 18 months of homelessness, I became homeless in 2019 early on, because the economic recession was happening long before the pandemic hit. So a solid year prior to that, people were starting to really struggle getting jobs. Unemployment claims were going up. So the economic problem that we have right now was made very much worse by the pandemic, but was not caused by the pandemic alone. And I think a lot of people have lost sight of that too, is that, we were already having significant economic problems even before the pandemic hit. Pandemic just exploded it, which I think is why the UBI message that Andrew Yang presented in his presidential campaign was so appealing to so many voters and to so many supporters, is that message of a universal basic income, the message of everybody needs a floor to stand on. In order for even capitalism to work, you have to have capital to work inside capitalism. And most people, most workers, don't have any capital. They have debt. That's what they have. And a long time ago, just generally in the economy, workers traded wages and leisure time for debt. And we are a debt based economy. And the way you build wealth in this nation is actually by incurring and then paying back debt, because that gives you credit. And that credit system rewards banks for lending money. So it's all a matter of imaginary zeros. It's all part of how fiat currency systems work. But I think a lot of people aren't very educated about it, don't understand it, don't understand how UBI makes a difference. And my answer is, if you've ever played the game of Monopoly, you understand. You start off with a bank, you start off with money at the beginning of the game. And then every time you pass through that play board, if you successfully make it all the way around, you get another dividend. You get money so you can continue to play. And that's the one part of the American economy right now that we plain out don't have. And so Congress passed in April a huge stimulus package, which included pandemic unemployment benefits for people such as myself. So I had been looking for work. I'd been offered a position with the US Census Bureau for the decennial census. And I was expecting to get trained and start in April. And the end of March, I got a letter saying we've been postponed. And it was postponed till the beginning of July. And for those 16 weeks, the PUA was supposed to cover me. And I applied for that money. I got an entitlement letter, and I have not received one penny of compensation for any of the 16 or 17 weeks I was unemployed. I didn't get the 133 a week that I was entitled to from the state, nor did I get the $600 a week supplement. So I'm out roughly about $12,000 the state of Missouri owes me in pandemic unemployment benefits that they've been paid. They received the money for me, but I don't have it. And now that I've moved out of the state, they're saying I'm not even a covered worker anymore. And I'm like, doesn't matter. I was living in the state when I applied. I have an entitlement letter. You owe me money. And I can't get a single person who's an elected representative in my former district to answer a phone call, to answer an email, to have any accountability as to where's my money and how am I going to get it. And that's so many different problems. And my answer is just like, just pay us money. Just give us money every single month. Stop with the means testing, stop with the hoops, stop with all the barriers, because all it does is hurt me and my children perpetually. It's an ongoing thing. If I'd had a UBI 10 years ago, I wouldn't have spent 10 years in Missouri as a victim. If I had had a UBI 10 years ago, it would have been super easy for me to say, I don't need to be abused. My kids don't need to be abused. Here's money for an attorney. Here's money for living. Here's money for to keep my car running so I can go to all the court hearings and everything else. Like, here's the tools to do the job that I need to do as a mom, which is protect my kids. And I didn't even have any of those tools. So, like, I found the only attorney that would represent me for the no money that I had. And it still didn't work out for me. He died before we had our divorce hearing. And so, like, I was left, I'd forked out money for an attorney and was left with no representation. And the courts don't care. They don't care. If you're self-represented, that's okay. You need to understand the law if you're going to represent yourself. Unfortunately, that's contrary to what the Constitution says about our rights in the court system. But the family court system isn't even regular courts. And they don't even, at least in Missouri, they're not judges. They're called commissioners. They're appointed. So there's no like real system in place, at least there, that is designed to actually support parents that are poor. Like, it hurts us every single time. So I just think my situation and my experience, it's unique to me, but it doesn't make me special because there are millions of parents that go through this every year, that go back to court for modifications that oftentimes don't get granted, even though they have very valid reasons for asking for those modifications, in part because you have to have an attorney represent you to make it be effective. And if you don't have money for an attorney, well, I'm sorry, you don't get the things that you, by rights, as a parent, should be entitled to. So it's a problem. And I have had lots of training, psychology, social work. I worked in the field as a social worker, as a foster care worker, as a foster parent, long before I got married and had kids. I've had lots of experience, and I will tell you straight up, the biggest problem that our nation faces, the biggest security risk to our nation, isn't anything any foreign government is doing, isn't anything some terrorist group is doing. It is what our government does to its citizens every single day by denying universal health care, by denying a universal income, and by selling our commons and having sold our commons off to the highest bidder, to corporations. And to me, that undermines everything that once made America truly great. And I understand why Make America Great Again was such an appealing slogan. It worked for Reagan and it worked for Trump because there are a lot of people who sense that we've lost something as a nation, but they don't know what that something is. And the only way that people can reflect on it is to think about their own situation and say, well, I know where I've been shorted. So it's it, it's easy to get caught up in that partisanship, right? And to get caught up in the messaging and to have to see your own challenges and see where somebody's policies are or aren't hurting you, or who can you trust. And my answer is you can't trust any of them, because in order to get to those positions, oftentimes they have to take the bribe, they have to take the dark money, they have to take money in order to run a campaign. You talked about this very, very well the other day. You're going to have to raise at least $1 million in order for your campaign in your area to be as effective as you want it to be. And I think, as we're in this in between election cycle towards midterms, which is I think what you're running for, correct? 2022. Okay.
Yes.
So these midterm elections then become super important, not necessarily to get the right candidates elected, but to raise the bar, so to speak, and to demand accountability. And midterms are an easy way for the major parties to kind of push through candidates that are less appealing because people aren't as aware. So I think that we're in a very delicate political time right now of really the majority of people in the United States are really suffering and really need significant policy changes to make things better for all of us. And we have people in power who are giving us the finger and saying, screw you, it's your fault. And that's where I say, as a victim of abuse, stop gaslighting the American public. Because a lot of us see what you are doing and we have no patience for it. And I think that helps explain the Capitol riots on the 6th of January, is that people are disgusted with all the ways that we've been shorted by the government. And for people who don't have the knowledge base like I've been able to get through my education and my work experience, right? And even then my later on political and community organizing experience, and really learning the feet on the ground how things work and don't work. People don't know who to blame, so it's easy to blame the other party. It's easy to blame the guy. You're aligned on one side or the other, and so it's easy to blame the other guy. It's the other guy's fault. It's always the other guy's fault, versus taking an even bigger step back and say it's all broken. Like, none of it's working. It's not the other guy, it's all of you. It's all of this. And here are some things like a large group of citizens have identified are going to help us through. And this is where the people in positions of power are saying, we're not going to use your solution because it's not good for us. And I don't know what to do with that other than do what you're doing. Run for office, support people, new people who aren't part of the political cabal, who aren't enmeshed in the party politics, who actually don't care about the party politics and don't really care about party. They care about our country. They care about our fellow citizens. That's why Yang was so on point with the humanity first message of, we need to make this system work for the people, because it's supposed to be for us. And it's clearly not for us right now. And how do we get back to a time than it was for us? Although I fully well know that there was no time previously where America was truly great for everybody. It was really great for a small number of people. And for a while after World War II, it was really great for a huge number of people, in part because of the changes that came out of the New Deal legislation, which was nothing more than the last ditch attempt to save capitalism. When people think, oh, it was our country moving into socialism, it was a compromise. It was a socialist policy, at least theoretically, a socialist policy based movement, but it was specifically to ensure that capitalism in America didn't completely collapse. It was that was the compromise was, let's do these few little things that look very socialist so that we can save capitalism, so that basically, I mean, it was part of the Red Scare and everything else, but it was really like, we know that this is the crossroads, and if we don't do these few little socialist things, we're going to lose the fight. We're going to end up being infiltrated by communists and socialists, and our country wouldn't stand for that. The power brokers in the country wouldn't stand for that. Not not in the 30s and 40s, and certainly not today. So it's been this long historical shift. And like, it's just ridiculous to me when people are like, oh, Biden's a socialist. I'm like, no, he's not. There is not a socialist in Congress or Senate right now. There is not one. There are some who will talk about socialist policies, but there's not a single socialist.
You had a lot to say. You were ready to go. Yeah, I wanted to introduce you before you got
It's
taken
okay.
off a
I
little
just
bit.
launch into the real talk because that I don't care. Like, who cares who I am? I don't give a shit.
This is Kai McCoy.
Hi,
uh,
everybody.
we met last week. I was headed onto the Yang Gang Roundtable podcast. There's a whole thing we tweeted about it. She caught it and she mentioned something about her story, and she wanted to share it. And I said, well, I'd love to invite you on to my stream that I do every week, to tell your story and get it down, so people can see it and hear it, and it'll be in the record. We started the stream with 0 viewers, and she just kind of dived right in. But that's okay. So there's a number of things here. So when a couple times you had mentioned, so first off, I want to say it's awesome that you were able to get the counseling today that you were that you needed. That's really great. It's one of those things. It's like thinking about, obviously I'm vying for a federal seat. And you talked about the difference in the legislation and the enforcement between Missouri and Indiana, for survivors and the counseling and how the police handle it. And so I guess it's something that I have to explore further of, okay, what level is like, it's always a states' rights issue, right? Of like, okay, what can I do from the federal level to help with this? But you also answered that too, which is just give people money. Like it's instead of
Give
trying to
people
go
money in healthcare.
yeah, money in healthcare.
It's
Yeah,
that simple.
yes, and instead of trying to go through like the state level, like unemployment insurance and all this other stuff, which is what they kind of had. They didn't have to do it. They could have just given everybody money, but that's what they did. You run into all these problems, all these complications. The logistics get ridiculous, and I bet it was way more expensive. I bet the administration of all of it was way more expensive than it would have been to just give everybody money in the first place.
It costs virtually nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Outside of the dollars you're spending out of your reserve,
Yeah.
or printing new, which they did with that first stimulus.
Mm-hmm.
They just made new currency.
Yeah.
And ultimately the currency in our nation, like something like 90 or 95% of it is digital. It's digital currency. It's ones and zeros in accounts. It's not printed money. We don't have an actual cash reserve that's very big at all of
as a percentage.
Bills.
Yeah, and you're right. And so it's like, printing money, quote unquote, is. I just want to make sure that you just muted and turned off your camera. But
I'm helping my daughter get dressed.
Oh, okay, cool, gotcha, no problem. So yeah, so let me back up here. So I wanna focus on this. The universal basic income is power and simplicity, right? So it's obviously we ran into problems with all this means testing, which was all stupid. If you really wanted, you could have clawed some of it back with taxes later on from people, but there didn't need to be means testing in the initial writing of the checks. But beyond that, it's just one of these things of like, there is a sustainable way to pay for universal basic income. Printing money to get it jump started is not a bad thing because of this concept called capacity utilization. We're only currently at about 75% of like buying all the things that there are available to buy. In April, it was about 65%. Until that gets closer to 100%, printing money will not cause inflation. So long as the reason that people aren't spending money is because they don't have money. If it's because they're scared to spend money, it's a different story. But that's not where we're at right now. People aren't afraid to spend money right now.
No, people just don't have it to spend.
People just don't have it to spend. Exactly. And
I'll just tag on to that. And the people who do have enough money to spend do spend it, but they also significantly hoard away more than they save more than they spend often. So and this
Yeah.
is where I'm talking about the top 10 percentile, that top, those at the very top 10%,
Yeah,
which
and
ends
and
up capturing like 90% of the nation's wealth. But
eh,
uh, when a significant portion of that, let's say 45% of the dollars they have are actually locked in a vault somewhere or saved in an account, that's not
well,
economic growth
and
in
where
the
they
way that
spend
we
it
think of it.
and where they spend it matters too. So dollars going through a community, making stuff, buying local things that are locally produced, participating in local activities, childcare, like these are things that actually like produce and move the economy forward and increase prosperity. But when the really really big dollars is actually beyond the billionaires. It's in the corporations.
Yeah.
It's your Googles, your Amazons, your Facebooks selling ad space on your phone screen. By the way, to telecoms and other advertising marketing firms and data back and forth. Well, moving that information around that doesn't produce prosperity because if you don't make stuff, you don't have stuff, right? And we don't make stuff in this country anymore. And
No,
we
the thing that
well,
contributes to our GDP the most right now is financial. It's stocks, bonds, finances, hedge funds.
yeah,
That's now
and
the thing that our GDP is measuring. It
and
used to be manufacturing
yeah,
and
and here's the
agriculture,
thing,
and it's not anymore.
and GDP, and that's why GDP used to work better than it does now. But GDP is just a BS metric at this point.
Well,
It's
and
useless.
it was literally picked because they couldn't come up with a better metric for the emergency that they were in 1929 and 1930, which is
Yeah,
about when GDP became the basis of how we measured economic stability in the United States. And it was never meant to be a permanent measure.
yeah, and in 1930 they didn't live in the information age. We that's one of the big that's one of the key differences. This is one of the things I talk about all the time. It's everything I talk about is always with the caveat, or sorry, the qualifier of in the United States right now. I don't care about what made sense 70 years ago. It doesn't
Mm-mm.
matter to me. It's irrelevant. I'll learn from it, but that has no bearing over what makes sense today. We live in the information age now, and we have the ability to measure all sorts of things that we didn't used to be able to measure. Um, Generally, the well-being of people, right? And that's not headline unemployment. That's not the stock market. That's not GDP. That's health. That's both physical and mental, which aren't as separate as we like to believe that they are. They are. It's happiness. It's standard of living. It's like how clean is your water? Do you have stable power? Like, do you have transportation? Do you have legal counsel if something comes up, right? And like that, all that starts to fall under the category of universal basic services, right? And so
Right.
then you get into this thing you talked about earlier when I said give people money. You said give people money in healthcare. Healthcare falls under the universal basic services umbrella, and universal basic
Right.
income and universal basic services actually have a multiplying effect. They go hand in hand. So we get both universal healthcare quality. I like to say universal quality healthcare because it's more than just checking a box. And universal basic income, you start to see massive, massive positive change. Now, the thing I really like about UBI is it's simple. It's just giving money to people, and our government's really good at giving money away. Healthcare is much more
They're
complex.
fantastic at it.
They're
They
fantastic. Yeah, they're
give
really good at
money all away, all over this world, all every day, all the time. Like
it.
it is continuous. So the question becomes, well, how do we benefit from that cycle?
Mm-hmm.
And right now the benefit are only comes if I file a tax return, even though I've been making for the last decade under $10,000 a year with 1 year exception.
Mm-hmm. And I
So
actually have a
it's like, what it doesn't, like, so I have to file a tax return even though I don't make enough to pay taxes
right.
in order to get the very little earned income credit, which
Mm-hmm.
is the largest poverty anti-poverty program our nation runs today, is the earned
That's
income tax credit and the
mhm.
child care tax credits.
which is
Those are
pathetic.
anti-poverty programs that
Yeah.
were instituted in the started being instituted in the 80s
Hmm.
following the 1980s recession. And it's
And
the one thing that bipartisan they got behind.
yeah, and the what was I about to say? So far as an anti-poverty measure goes, a tax credit is pretty pathetic. Because
Well, and
I'm
it
saying because you don't have a year to wait when you need the money,
there you
right?
go.
That's the main reason why I see it as pathetic is because the timing is just so incredibly important. Rent is due today; it's not due in a year.
Right.
Um, and so and poverty charges interest too, so it's not like you have money to save. There was another point I was going to ask you a question. Okay, so I've thought a lot about and like Andrew Yang talked about like protecting your freedom dividend and ensuring that only you were able to use it, but he didn't, at least so far as I saw, it didn't describe an actual mechanism to ensure that. I have thought of a mechanism, and I want your take on this as somebody with your experience. I'm considering the formation of a third type of personal bank account. We could call it the freedom account. I don't really care what we call it, but the whole point is this would be it. You don't have to use it, but it's there if you want it. The only way for money to come into this account is through the freedom dividend program. The only way for money to come out of the account is either to transfer it directly into another account with the same bank, personal account, that same person, or to withdraw it as cash, and that's it. And the whole point of that is so that way folks like yourself can choose to use that mechanism to ensure that it's not taken by any lawyers or predatory loan institutions or whatever, and that it is your money and only you can touch it no matter what. Even if you have a domestic abuser, it will still be your money and you'll still have control over it. Does that sound like a good mechanism? Are there tweaks that you would make to it?
So my answer is kind of twofold. I think Yang did address some of this in his platform with his comments about establishing a public bank. And
I would
it
do that
used
too,
to
but
be it used to be true that you could do basic banking services at the post office.
mhm.
That was true all the way until the end of World War II. To the best of my knowledge, and I may be wrong, so I don't want to say that with certainty because I'm not certain. But they provided basic banking services, so you could cash a check with your ID and buy stamps and get currency. Like you could do that at the post office.
Mm-hmm.
And that ended some decades ago. And so Yang's argument is, we need to go back to a public bank, a bank that belongs to the people. And so I think that if you said a third entity, well, my answer is, so then it should be the public bank. And then the public bank would only work for you under your social security number or your disbursement number. I would rather have another number assigned to me other than social security for my UBI, just because
The
social
security number
security is
is a
tied to
terrible.
wage labor. Social security has to do with
Yeah.
laboring. It doesn't have to do with money.
It's
It has
also
to
a
do with
terrible
taxes.
ID number. It was never built to be an ID number. It's
I
just like
know.
mechanically
Yeah,
horrendous. But
it is. So,
I
but
just want
that's
to
my
pause real
answer
quick.
is everybody gets a public banking account. That's where the UBI goes. Only that individual can withdraw from that. Or if you're a minor and are a dependent, and then I personally would like to see there be limits on how much a parent of that UBI for their child is put into that account. There's a limit to how much they can't clean it out. There must be a percentage left behind. And maybe families can elect what that percentage is dependent on where they are on the kind of poverty spectrum.
Okay, so a couple things. One, I do absolutely support the formation. I'll let you finish with your daughter. You're okay.
Sorry about that.
No, you're okay.
I have to talk to her.
I do absolutely support turning post offices into banks or like having basic banking services at post office. I do 100% support that, but I do think that having this um, very specific bank account tied specifically to the freedom dividend can be really important, because I don't want to run into a situation where like maybe you have a joint account. Hi.
Says hello. That's Elizabeth.
Nice to meet you, Elizabeth. I'm
She's taking
Sass.
a mental health day from
Oh,
school
she can't
today.
hear me.
Yeah, she can't hear you.
Yeah.
But do you want to say hello to Sass? To Sass? We'll say hello. You can hear you. Say
Hello.
Hi. I
I
hope
can
you're.
kind of hear you.
Oh, you can? Okay, here, she's gonna. There we go. Hey, Elizabeth. I'm Sass.
Hey.
I'm running for a
we're
political
live
office.
online.
Yeah, we're live right now. So I'm glad you and your mom were able to, have a good day together.
Yeah. All right. You go do your stuff so we can.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Cool. Yeah. So, um, one of the problems I don't want to run into is like joint accounts. So
Right.
like right, because obviously if you had a joint account with your abuser, then you could run into a lot of problems. They could claim that you were stealing their money or whatever, even though it's not their, it's your money. And so I do believe in the power of having this very like restricted account, and it wouldn't be required. You could choose to have your freedom dividend whenever you opt in. You can pick whatever account it comes to you, or a physical address to have it mailed to. But I also think that because I
See,
also
and
just
I'm actually a little bit opposed to a
okay.
physical check coming because that's too easy to intercept. That's too easy for people who abuse other people to get a hold of, to coerce them into opting for that and then forcing them to hand those physical checks over. It's a huge. I worked in adult abuse before I worked in foster care, and that was actually the second year of my master's program, was doing adult abuse investigations. And so the big thing that I was able to achieve through that was I developed a training program alongside the Kansas Attorney General's office to help people in banks identify victims of fiduciary abuse on elderly and disabled adults, because there are warning signs, and one of those warning signs is you have a customer who normally comes in once a week, has pretty regular transactions, deposits or withdrawals. Their checking account activity is very predictable on their bills and stuff, and all of a sudden they start coming in and start signing out checks for cash, or come in and make cash withdrawals, and they've never traditionally ever done that. That's a flag that maybe that person's being abused. Maybe that person is being coerced to pull money out of their savings, to pull money out of their accounts and hand them over to somebody who does not have any right to that money. And so, like, just training bankers to recognize some of these little warning signs was very important, because that's the number one way that people get abused is elderly people and disabled people. The number one way that the abuse happens to them, it's not usually sexual or physical abuse. It's emotional and financial abuse, and we're talking in the billions of dollars every year that are being stolen from people wrongly, because they just happen to be senior citizens, or they just happen to be physically disabled,
Okay,
or
so
or mentally ill.
right.
And to me, there's no difference. To me, there's no difference between a mental illness and a physical illness, because my brain is inside my head and my head is
Yeah.
part of my physical body. It's a
Yeah.
physical illness.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So I really appreciate that insight. That's helpful. So I guess I would come back and then ask, okay, so how do we get money to homeless folks then? Because
So
go ahead.
that gets even more challenging, and even universal programs miss some people.
Mm-hmm.
Period. They're going to miss undocumented workers, undocumented residents. They're going to miss dependents. They are going to miss a portion of severely physically or mentally ill people who end up on the streets because we do not have homeless services in the United States. And we have very aggressive laws in municipalities to prevent people from helping homeless people. It's a real thing. Even in Kansas City, it's illegal to sleep in your car parked on a public street. Now, that doesn't make sense to me, but it's the truth.
Hmm.
So, you know, during the pandemic, I saw articles. How are the homeless being treated during the pandemic? And empty vacant parking lots, and then they were drawing lines on the parking lot so that people could have their 6 by 8 square that they could roll up in their sleeping bag in the middle of a parking lot in like out in Las Vegas. Which to me, that's not homeless services. I don't know what that is, but that ain't homeless services. That ain't keeping homeless people safe, but it sure is kind of knowing who's showing up. So serving a more traditional homeless population, which I didn't fit into. Well, I mean, I do, because homelessness is a very broad category, and ultimately there are millions of people who are technically homeless that don't consider themselves homeless because they're staying with family, they're able to stay with a friend, maybe they have a roommate that was not their first choice. They would have rather not had a roommate, but because of the cost of housing, you end up in roommate situations. Those can very quickly turn abusive, particularly with if you suffer from some sort of disability. I mean, there's just so much stuff, and people don't think, oh, well, that's homelessness. But if you're living in somebody else's house and you don't have a single bill in your name, that's homelessness. Homelessness
Hmm.
is defined by having a stable place of your own that no one else can come into without your permission. Like that's what a home is. Most people don't think of it that way. So through this pandemic, and then there's the other portion of people that we would consider homeless. They're without permanent address, but they are nomads. They live nomadically. And many of those people that I have met over the past 15, 20 years since I finished my social work program, um, they live lives without social security numbers or without using their social security numbers. And they do just fine, kind of staying under the radar and operating more in the black market world. And some of those people you will never reach with a UBI. And a lot of those folks don't want it. They don't want tied down. They don't want a, an official tie to the government at all, which is why they don't have social security numbers. Some of them don't have birth certificates. Like some of them come from very long histories of saying, I don't have to tell you I exist, United States. It's none of your business whether or not I have children. If I'm not asking for anything for them, then you don't have any right to tell me what to do. And that's kind of a legitimate perspective to take. I don't have to register for a social security number if I never plan to work. And many people will argue that income taxes are illegal, that the way that we came about doing an income tax thing to begin with was questionable. A lot of it does go back down to the New Deal, and that keeping track of the city before the New Deal, there weren't social security numbers because social security didn't exist. And this is where, so I had grandparents who were born before there were social security numbers, before any of that happened. And they just went out and did their work and did their thing. There wasn't an income tax system the way that we know it now. So for the people that have traditionally always been kind of off the social security grid, you're not going to capture those folks if they don't want to be captured. They're not going to
Well,
get a UBI if they don't show up
mhm.
and sign up to get one.
I,
So I think the challenges are mostly with the people that are in between the two extremes. The employed person with the social security number who has a wage job that may not be enough and who's going to get the UBI because they're already on the grid. And then there's the people that are fully off the grid and don't want to be seen and never want to and don't want to have any part of it. and they can be where they're at, in my opinion, because even if they're struggling with disability, I believe in the integrity of adults being able to make their own choices and to support that. So then it's the people in between, and those are going to be almost 80% of the people in between those spectrums that are out on the streets have substance abuse problems, physical and mental health problems, and are veterans. Veterans make up the bulk of the homeless population of people that we see panhandling on the side of the road, standing with signs, asking for money, like all of that stuff. Almost all the largest majority of them are veterans. And so that's my other answer is the solution comes out of what our military does to our citizens when they're coming out of that system, and how are they being supported, because it's dismal and there's no excuse for it. Not when our military can lose $21 trillion and have no accounting for it. Like that, it's unacceptable. There shouldn't be a single homeless veteran anywhere in the United States.
Yeah. So another couple of things you hit on. So yeah, I mean, like UBI is an opt-in program. I'm not concerned about the nomads. I mean, I've talked to somebody who was employed and was like, "What if I don't want it because I just don't want it?" Then don't take it.
Right.
Whatever. Um, you know, uh, but I guess this still comes back around to so you'd stated that you were, maybe I'm getting this wrong, but you were a little bit opposed to checks, but I also still don't want to miss some of these folks who shouldn't be missed. Some of the folks who do really need this basic income, such as homeless vets who really could use that money. And I understand that you can run into like trust issues and these sorts of things. But the way that I envisioned it in my brain when I was thinking about this was, okay, a homeless person walks into some kind of social services center after this program comes in, and one of the first things that happens in a lot of social services is they try to find out what programs a person is eligible for. And it's like, oh, well, you live here, you live in America, therefore you get universal basic income. So we can get you a check. We can have a streamlined process by working with municipalities, private and charitable government organizations to like get those checks right away. We can get you a check today, and we're going to pair you up with a social services person. It's your money. You get to decide how you want to spend it, but they will be there to help guide you and help you to make decisions, because it can be hard to know what to do with a check for $1,000 or $2,000 out of nowhere if you've never had more than $50 to your name in the last 12 years.
Right.
And so that's how I envisioned it in my brain. So I'm wondering if you think that there should be any tweaks to that.
Um, I think that's actually not a bad idea. Because it at the point that UBI becomes a reality, the people on the ground, people that are living in the homeless camps, they will hear about it even if they don't care.
Mm-hmm.
It'll hit their radar. So then the then the issue does become, how do we help them use that asset to reach their goals? Well, that's what social workers are trained to do.
Yeah.
Like that at
Yeah.
its root is what we do.
Mm-hmm.
A social worker's calling is to help the most vulnerable gain skills, knowledge, resources, and experience to improve their condition.
Mm-hmm.
That's it.
Yeah.
What does improve their condition mean? Well,
It's
if
up
you're
to
living
them. But
if you're living in squalor, you're able to move out of squalor. If you're living with an illness that's not treated, then you're able to get treatment for your illness and not be sick anymore. Like it's not it's a vague phrase, but it's very simple to understand what it means.
mm-hmm.
It's different for every single individual,
Mm-hmm.
but the common things are always going to be basic needs first. So, that's where I think of the Maslow's hierarchy of
Yeah.
needs. Bottom, and Yang talked about this. I loved Yang's campaign and his platform so much, because step by step it broke down exactly where the problems are in the United States, and sensible, realistic, practical solutions for addressing that, so that we can have a healthier nation and a stronger nation and a more united nation where we're not bickering at each other, where we're not feeling the need to put all of our money into the defense budget because it's the terrorists' fault that we're so unstable. That's all bullshit, and I know it, you know it. Like, like the truth of the matter is, we just need to have a stronger nation by supporting our citizenry, and we don't do that. And in fact, we do many, many things that hurt the citizenry for profit. And so, like, moving off of GDP is essential to kind of shift the focus. That's one of the brilliant parts of Yang's platform is, I mean, like the things that sold me on Yang were legalizing weed, UBI, getting off of GDP, universal health, however that ends up being implemented. And I do not support complete eradication of private health insurance right now. I think we can get there eventually, but I don't think that's where you go out of the gate because that will break us as a nation. It will. And Yang understood it in very practical ways. So again, I have a very deep love for how his platform was crafted and the reasoning behind it, the data that supported it, and then the very practical solutions. And the other thing I really loved about Yang is he's like, I'm not necessarily right about all of this. This is just what I think. I want to know what you people think. I want the best solution possible.
Mm-hmm.
So again, like this meshes very well with my social work background that I graduated from University of Kansas, where a particular social work perspective was developed through research that they did, called the strengths perspective. And much of counseling and social work has traditionally, in medicine too, has been based on this deficit based or disease based model of you're missing something very important that healthy people have. Let's fix that broken thing and then you're going to be healthy. Well, a strengths perspective does away with all of that and says, hey, there's all of these areas in your life where you're very, very healthy. How can we use what you've already done for yourself and broaden that so that we can use the strengths that you have that are working well in all of these other areas of your life to apply to the places where you struggle. So we have challenges and we have strengths, and we have strengths that are suited to meeting the challenges. Sometimes we don't know how to use those strengths to meet those challenges. And that's where your professional comes in and bridges that gap, right?
Yeah. So I still want to come back to this very technical question of the checks.
Okay,
Like that's what I'm looking for an answer for. So
checks. I don't,
like
so, and I go back to checks are this physical thing that's too easy to steal from somebody. I much prefer the idea of everybody being issued a universal basic debit card or spending card. Like and like the way that we are now moving our currency almost predominantly in a digital format, no longer on paper with paper bills. There are issues with that, and I do understand the security that comes out of having cash in hand. And I'm not going to say that nobody should ever be able to get cash in hand, but then the issue becomes how do we make sure that the cash that's going out is going to the person it belongs to, whether it's cash in hand or a check. And a check is cash in hand essentially.
yeah, and then I
um
mean, and then it becomes this issue of, or it becomes trying to find this balance between like data and privacy and all of this of like, well, I want as many people as possible to get the universal basic income, but like if the only way to get it is like through what even if it's technically not a credit card, but what looks like a credit card, like that could turn a lot of people off who really really need it. A lot of people have this idea that like, particularly people unhoused folks who just don't, they need help, they want help, and they want money, but they at the same time they also don't want to be connected to the government because they just don't trust the government, which is like reasonable given their experience. And so
I think it's reasonable even without that experience. I didn't have a huge amount of
yeah,
trust in the government even
yeah,
beforehand because of my because of in part because of my schooling, but also because I became disabled when I was a teenager.
mm-hmm.
So my disabilities predate any interest I ever had in social work or universal income or psychology or any part of that. Like I was
Yes,
15 and I got horrendously ill, and then I turned 18 and couldn't support myself. And what do you do? Like
yeah,
I
and
was fortunate that I got raised in a middle class to upper middle class neighborhood and in a middle class family, but that middle class life did not continue as soon as I became an adult. And so, like, you're asking me a very technical question. I'm not giving you a great answer. And I think that the risk is always that the money isn't going to go where it needs to go, no matter how you disperse it.
okay,
And so
that's the
I don't
answer.
think there's a great
There's no
answer.
perfect.
And I
Okay,
think that the best answer is let people choose.
and
Let
that's
the
and that's
individual choose.
and that's
To
what I'm
me,
saying.
it's always about let people decide for themselves. And then if the state needs to intervene because that money is being appropriated in a wrong way, because there's abuse happening or because somebody's vulnerable to the extent that they just can't manage it because they're not together, and that will be true for many people who are homeless, then that's where the other universal services become oh so important, and we
Yeah,
cannot leave it out of this formula. Because if we're gonna move from means testing into universal entitlement programs, which is the most sensible thing on both the left and the right
hmm
to do, conservatives like it or should like it because it's effective and cheap to administer. It barely costs anything to put money in an account for the government to do that. It doesn't cost a whole lot. Um, it costs a whole lot to have people go over paperwork and do means testing and all of that
yeah,
stuff. And one of the reasons that there's so much pushback on instituting something like UBI and getting rid of all the means testing program, people want to make it about, well, you're going to take more money away from poor people. That's some bullshit. You're giving them empowerment, and you can't ever put a cost on what it feels like to be empowered.
People
That
give all sorts of reasons, and they're all debunkable. But
but then
this
it
goes.
becomes universal housing, rights to universal housing, rights
Yeah.
to universal health care, rights to universal clean, free drinking water.
hmm
Why are we paying for
It's
clean water?
it's ridiculous. I agree. But so this just comes back around because at the beginning I had said the freedom account that's like optional. You can also have it go into your own personal checking or savings account, or you can receive it as a physical check. And like so I'm wondering, are you still pushing back on that model a little bit, or
I mean, personally, I'm not a big fan of the check issuing idea again
but
because
so
I've
then
just
so
seen
I'm
too many
wondering,
problems. But
but
if if it's one piece of this larger picture, I don't have as much. I mean, again, why would it? It may not be right for me, but it may be right for the person who opts for it. And again, I think that if we have better universal services across the board and start putting money where it makes sense instead of putting money into the military or as much money into the military and militarizing our police forces, instead of spending money on that stuff, let's just put it into programs, social programs that benefit the communities where people are living.
yeah,
And
and
the best way to benefit the communities where people are living is to give everybody UBI. It was I forgot.
we agree on that point.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying, the question I'm asking is for the homeless person who walks into a social services center who does not have a bank account, and doesn't want one or whatever, how, and like doesn't want that card, how do we get that money to them? I don't see a way other than a check to do that. Um, and to me, that seems like a better than nothing option.
It is. It's a
Okay.
better than nothing option. So, but it's different. What you're describing is slightly different than what I first interpreted you to
Okay.
say, which is that we can just have people sign up to get regular printed checks, like
If
mailed to
they
their
if they
house.
choose, if that's what they want, I still would say that though. I would still say that like
And
most
I'm not
people
gonna.
would choose. I'd say that
I
most
don't
people
mean
would
to like
choose.
necessarily push back on that. It just makes me feel. It makes me feel twitchy
Okay.
because again, I've seen too many cases where that just people with their social security checks. And now social security will not, absolutely will not mail a social security check. You must have an account to get social security.
Oh
It is
wow, that's
only by
interesting.
direct deposit.
That's so interesting. Okay.
So that's, I mean, I think that's another important piece. And there's a reason they did that. And it was because too many elders were having their social security checks stolen before they ever arrived at the house. They were being stolen from postal carrier vehicles. They were being stolen from post office drop box. And this is where people are like, yeah, but that's illegal. It doesn't keep it from happening,
Right,
fools.
it's money, yeah. So, okay, that's
Something being
interesting.
illegal is only important if there's some way to enforce
Right.
that, and there's no enforcement.
Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, that's definitely something I have to think about some more then.
But
Yeah,
it's different to me than what you're saying is a very specific and isolated circumstance of somebody who's homeless. They have high mistrust. They don't want to get a bank account. They don't really have any documents other than their proof of identity, because there's no way anybody's going to get a UBI check without that. I mean, that's
unfortunately,
just reality.
that's just, yeah, it's not politically, it's not going to pass through Congress if I say, if you are an adult living in America, you can get a check. I know that that isn't going to pass. I would love it to, but it's not going to.
Right.
Uh,
I mean, best of worlds versus the real world.
right.
So this is where I try to stay as grounded as I can
Mm-hmm.
in the real world. And it was very hard for me when I first got out of school because I hold so many very idealistic ideas about
Mm-hmm.
how things could be very, very beautiful if we would just make a few changes, you
Yeah.
know. And this is where I will with my leftist friends talk about collapsing capitalism, but I'm not a universal anti-capitalist either. I
Right.
like this human-centered capitalism idea. We haven't actually tried that ever in the history of this nation or in the history of this economy. And this is where I say our economy is racist and sexist. It's
Mm-hmm.
against children and old people. And that's a problem for me across the board. UBI fixes all of that. It doesn't fix it
It's the first
entirely,
step.
but
I
it
say, I always
addresses
call it
it
the first
in a
step. It's
meaningful
always the
way.
first step. Yeah, it's the first step. Cool. Well, I know. I mean, we've been at this for an hour already. I know your daughter's been bugging you. Probably wants to hang out with
Oh,
you.
she went outside. She's fine.
Oh, okay. Cool. Well, was there? I mean, there was a lot that I didn't touch on based on what you said. But was there anything else specific that you wanted to say or talk about?
Well, I mean, and this is a kind of a new issue for me. I'm used to being on the round table, so I'm not so used to the attention being on me. Although obviously I can talk nonstop. I'm so very passionate about universal services. It's something that I learned about as a graduate student. I'd already had some inkling of it because in patient groups, for people with my illness, I talk to people all over the world with our, with our illness, and there are people in other parts of the world who do much better, in part because they have better programs for people with disabilities. France is a great example. They have universal health care. Anybody can go to France and get medical treatment pretty much, and you don't pay a penny for it. They get ample, like, disability benefits, and in almost all developed nations that have disability programs, payment programs, where you get a check because you're disabled and can't work, right? And support yourself. The United States is the only one that I'm aware of that requires that you establish 100% can't do any job anywhere.
I know. What is it? You have to
It's
not work for 2 years before
ridiculous.
your first check, correct?
I don't know what the average waiting time is anymore. I
Okay.
can tell you that the case that I filed in 1993, the disability case that I filed in 1993, and so I became disabled in 1990. I was 15. I then turned 16. So by the time 1993 hit, I was already 18. We didn't apply when I was a child, which was my parents' mistake because I was still fully disabled pretty much, and teaching myself at home, to finish high school and get into college. So, but I waited 10 years. I went through every single appeal possible. I had a representative push for me. I had 3 boxes of medical record, and when I say boxes, I mean bankers boxes, huge boxes of medical records for them to look at. And ultimately they said that I wasn't disabled. And in some looking that I've done since that time, I've had people that have worked for Social Security that did some looking for me that wasn't really part of their job and could have gotten them fired. um, there's a secret list, and it's a blacklist of people who have done what I did, which is push it all the way to the end. And I am now probably never going to be eligible for disability benefits ever in my life because I'm on that list. It would require something catastrophic and unrecoverable to happen to me, and it better be something other than the illness that I applied under. So that's a problem. We have big problems about that in the United States too, which is why I say, fuck it, just let's get a UBI going so
Mm-hmm.
that the people that can't prove their 100% disability, and I'm not 100% disabled, but I am 100% not able to work a full time schedule.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, and of course, this is then we get into like the way we define work and this narrow slice of labor. Working but not for a wage, and and like this is
I do
this
a ton of work. Like,
not for a
like
wage.
if,
Yes.
if, if my life were structured the way that I wanted it to be,
Mm-hmm.
I would be logging this time that I'm spending with you
Mm-hmm.
as community organizing hours. I have a
Mm-hmm.
little work code next to it, and it's work. And if I were working for an NPO or a non for profit, yeah, well, yeah, NPO or NGO, right? If I were working for an NPO or an NGO, this would be part of my work day. Community organizing for UBI. It's part of our agencies. Of I'm not employed by any fucking agency right now.
Mm-hmm.
This is my avocation, not my vocation, but it is also part of my vocation, my training as a social worker, because most people think of social workers as being the people on the ground, child protective workers, and the people that show up with the clipboard at your house and fill out forms, and that's what they're there for. That was my impression of social workers before I went into training. But the truth of the matter is, social workers are also very, and this is one of the things that's happening inside our state legislatures and inside our national legislatures, that more and more social workers, therapists, and counselors are now running and winning. And that's super important because I think those are the people that we need to have in place in elected offices so that when we come up with these wonderful proposals for universal services, we have the actual credentialed support in Congress, in the House, in the Senate, in the House, in our state senates, in our state houses, to say, absolutely, this is what makes sense. We've had the professional experience, the training to make it work. So micro level is individual social work, counseling, that sort of stuff, working with individuals and families. And then what I am now have been for the past several years is focused on the macro level stuff, the big policy stuff. And there aren't very many paying jobs for that. There are
Mm-hmm.
lots of jobs for grant writers or contract gigs. I mean, there's not regular full time work for people that do the kind of work that I do, which is to go out there and talk to absolutely anybody I can talk to about why UBI is the thing that will get us out of this hot mess. And we'll start ending this animosity that we have between Team Red and Team Blue and where we're just Americans and we're all trying to make America a beautiful country and live in a beautiful country and have safe communities and be part of our safe communities and and build those things and use our time not for unpaid work like I do as a mom taking care of my kids when they're not in school, right? And what their father did when my kids weren't in school and they were with him, rather than having that be unpaid work, to have that be recognized as work and to have us supported in that, because one of the things that will make our healthier, stronger communities is for children to have parents around and home. It's been one of the benefits of the pandemic, but because we haven't had the economic floor to stand on, it's only destabilized families even worse. And instead of building community and building bonds and making things stronger, the pandemic has instead torn us apart, torn families apart, torn the communities apart, and destabilized everything. And that destabilization is a horrible tool of the powerful wealth class against impoverished classes. And this is where I will take the very hard Marxist standpoint of, oh no, this is a class war. It's always been a class war. It will continue to be a class war until we eradicate the class system. And we aren't interested in that right now. And we show an interest by promoting things like universal services and a universal basic income, which is one of the reasons why Martin Luther King Jr. got killed. Because the last of his life wasn't about civil rights, it was about economic rights, it was about economic justice, it was absolutely about the class war, because it disproportionately falls on the shoulders of African Americans, of blacks and brown skinned people in our country, and people who aren't native English speakers. And we cannot deny, I'm sorry, everybody who came from Central and South America, who lives in the predominantly southern and western part of the United States, who are native Spanish speakers, they're freaking Americans, dudes. They belong here in the United States. We won a war with Spain. It was called the Spanish American War. Like, don't ignore our freaking history, people. So don't tell me that the United States only has one national language, because that's a lie. It denies true American history, and it's not the point. The point is that we have real justice issues, and it starts with economic justice.
Yeah.
And it trickles up that way.
Well, hey, I really appreciate you coming on and talking, Kai. This has been fantastic. It's great learning about who you are, the knowledge that you have. Glad to hear that you're interested in big idea, politics and social work kind of stuff, which is amazing because once I'm in office, I may be giving you a call to help me write some legislation, which would be sweet.
I should send you a copy of some legislation that I helped write. In 2019, I went with the Women's Caucus of the Green Party of the United States to lobby in Congress for public campaign financing. And HR1 is a piece of crap, and I do not support it on any level. It is a huge omnibus bill, which is a great way for them to pass legislation that hurts us, because they like to bury crap in it. They're counting on nobody ever reading the kind of gross stuff that they put in there.
I started reading through it a little bit, and some stuff was interesting, but like I've seen this kind of like unfiltered support for it, and I'm like, I still like there's a lot in here I gotta go through before I can support this. And I've started hearing about making it easier for ranked choice voting. Ranked choice voting, I don't know if you were listening to me talk about it on the roundtable, is a trash voting method that will entrench us in the duopoly even longer. It's not, no voting scientist supports ranked choice voting.
No, right, and it's not supported by the data at all.
Correct.
And if you've ever participated in an instant runoff or ranked choice vote, what you find out is that there's virtually no transparency.
Oh, yeah, no, because it's the only single winner method that isn't precinct summable. And it's like, and one of the problems is like, even if you did release all of the ballot data, then you're opening up to like vote selling and vote coercion. And it's like, it's just a garbage
It's
method.
junk.
But I
And
mean, I
so
can go off
when I
about it
first
all
learned
day
about
long.
it,
Mm-hmm.
it would have been 2008 or so, and it intrigued me. And then I kind of watched as that movement trickled out. And then I noticed that the people that were acquaintances and people that I respected who were leading that movement, right,
Mm-hmm.
left it. And so
Mm-hmm.
in conversations, why did you leave? Oh, because we did a few. We did a few runs and it's terrible.
Mm-hmm.
Like that was the answer.
It's
It's like
awful.
it looks good on paper. It looks really great.
It
And
looks
then we
good if you
played around
don't
with
know
it
anything
and we
about
couldn't
voting
get the
systems. It looks good, but if once you start learning about voting systems, especially under the guise of modern voting science, like traditional
yeah,
voting science, it was more questionable. Modern voting science has completely debunked it, and
right.
it's just not good. But
And
like
then
we can
a
go.
good friend of mine told me about approval voting, and it's so funny too because now I have he gave me his car when we left Missouri,
Oh
and the
wow.
car that he gave us has a huge approval voting sticker on the bumper, alongside the two Bernie stickers, and
Hmm.
it's just I love it because I would love to see approval voting get traction, and this is where I'm with Shale on this. It's not that I don't like star voting, but it's a much harder sell,
For
particularly
some
in
jurisdictions, it's a
states.
harder sell.
Well, and I think it's a much harder sell, particularly in these red states in the Bible Belt, because you,
It's such a big change is part of it.
well, approval is easy because it just requires that you mark more than one instead of marking only
It's just
one,
changing
and you're
the
still going to have
one sentence on the ballot. That's all it is. I advocate for both. I'm working with the Center for Election Science right now to get Austin City Council elections shifted to approval voting, but I do support both. Kind of the way that I put it is like learn about both of them if you're interested in voting systems. Look through your state's election code, your municipality's election code, measure the political will, the amount of money there is for elections. If it seems like star voting is perfectly viable where you are, fight for star voting. But if not, approval voting is a great backup to fight for instead.
well, and I know that the city of St. Louis, just to go
Was a
back to my
fantastic
roots,
election. Oh my god, it was so
right?
great.
So, but here's
Loved it.
some of the backstory is that they worked really hard to try to get IRV adopted.
Yeah,
And
the
there was
Lewis
something
Reed.
about,
Did
there's
you
a
see?
legislative reason that they could not
Mm-hmm.
do IRV, even in St. Louis County.
Yeah.
So then they naturally were like, well, we don't like this first past the post anymore. We need to have a change.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where star voting entered in because it was from the IRV proponents' standpoint,
Mm-hmm.
it was the next best thing to rank choice. And this is where you and I know it's far superior.
It's far superior. Yeah, I mean, and look, I talked all about the St. Louis election last week, and talked about approval voting last week, and I go on about voting systems all the time. I'm glad to hear that you're interested. I have a little something I might send you something I've been working on, something that's really cool.
Anytime.
But we've been at this for an hour and a half. I know I have other stuff I gotta do. I'll let you go. Thank you so much. We'll stay
Thank you for
connected.
having me. Yes,
Yeah.
and I'll come back anytime to talk about anything. I can get way more personal with my story if that's ever of value. Um anything. Like talk about approval voting, talk about anything. Like I'm there to help spread the word, raise awareness,
I am gonna
and
want
and
to start
push for
bringing.
change.
I'm gonna want to start bringing on people who disagree with me. So if you know people who don't like UBI, send them to me. I want to bring them on because it's not about having. It's about a conversation. I don't want to have debates. I don't want to have angry yelling at each other. Eventually, I want to do it in person, but of course, COVID. But I want to start having just conversation. We want to show by example how to have a conversation with somebody who disagrees with you because the kind of veil of social media has caused a lot of us to forget how to do that. So
Absolutely. And this is where in my political work, learning deep canvassing methods, and as
Hmm.
you're a candidate and you're getting ready that is the best
I know
technique.
that was something that Yang did, and like people responded much more to the Yang canvassers than they did like the scripted canvassers. But all right, I gotta
Scripted
go.
canvassing's horrible, so don't
Yeah.
do it.
All right. Thank you, Kai. Have a nice
Good
day.
luck. Thank you. You
Thanks.
too.
Bye. All right, everybody. I know you can't see me, but you can hear me, and that is gonna